London, 1888. A predator stalks the midnight streets of Whitechapel. Victims fall in quick succession, each murder more brazen than the last. Yet the killer vanishes every time. Police whistles pierce the night, witnesses catch fleeting glimpses, and Jack the Ripper slips through their fingers. He was almost caught, almost, on several occasions. A witness rounds the corner just moments too late. A constable's boots echo on the cobblestones, only yards away as the murderer fades into the shadows. Overcrowded slums, dim gaslight, and a city teeming with nocturnal workers all helped hide his retreat. How did Jack the Ripper pull it off, time after time? From the first ferocious attack to the final atrocity, this investigation retraces his likely escape routes, each one a puzzle of streets, timing, and luck. Each getaway, a dark art perfected. Now journey back to the very beginning of that dreadful autumn, before the world even knew his name. A narrow stairwell in George Yard, a woman's muffled cry in the dark, and the first time Jack the Ripper got away. This is a special collaboration between Bad Things and our friends at Zoufry, a reconstruction of how the world's most infamous killer may have escaped again and again. Chapter 1. Escape 1. George Yard, 7th of August, 1888. The first escape. A blood-spattered stairwell in George Yard buildings marks what many believe to be Jack the Ripper's first attack. In the early hours of August 7th, 1888, the body of Martha Tabram was found on a first-floor landing just before 5 a.m. She had been stabbed 39 times in a frenzied assault. No one saw her killer leave, and in truth the neighborhood barely stirred at the murder. A resident later admitted she'd been awakened by a cry of murder during the night, but such cries were common in Whitechapel and went ignored. This was a district where violence and shouts in the night were tragically routine. Even an ominous scream often drew no inquiry. The layout of George Yard offered the killer a perfect escape route. The building stood in a narrow alley off Whitechapel High Street. A single stairway led up from the street. After the deed, the murderer likely walked calmly down those stairs into the darkness. At around 2 a.m., a patrolling constable had actually been in the vicinity and even stopped to question a loitering soldier nearby. But by 2:30 a.m., the estimated time of Martha's murder, the street was quiet. A cab driver returning home at 3:30 a.m. saw a form on the landing but mistook it for a sleeping vagrant. It wasn't until 5 a.m. that the body was recognized as a murder victim. By then, the killer was long gone. How did he avoid detection in such close quarters? The answer lies in timing and anonymity. The common lodging houses and tenements were labyrinthine and poorly lit. The Ripper slipped out during the dead of night, likely within minutes of the attack, when all neighbors were asleep. Crucially, nobody was looking for him. At this point, Whitechapel had not yet awakened to the terror in its midst. A constable's beat passed nearby, but the officer saw nothing amiss on the stairs during his rounds. By the time an alarm was raised, the murderer had melted away into Whitechapel's maze of courtyards and alleys, another shadow among many. In this first scenario, Jack the Ripper's escape was quick and silent, a harbinger of how effectively he would evade capture in the murders to come. Chapter 2. Escape 2. Bucks Row, 31st of August, 1888. Disappearing into the dawn. 3 weeks after his first known murder, Jack the Ripper struck again. In the pre-dawn gloom of August 31st, 1888, a carter named Charles Cross stumbled upon the body of Mary Ann Polly Nichols on Bucks Row, now Durward Street, at about 3:40 a.m. Polly's throat had been deeply cut, and her abdomen savagely slashed. Once again, the killer was nowhere to be seen. How had he escaped just minutes before Cross arrived? The answer, it seems, lies in Buck's Row's proximity to a bustling thoroughfare, and in the peculiar rhythms of Whitechapel at daybreak. Polly Nichols was last seen alive around 2:30 a.m., walking eastward toward Whitechapel Road. After murdering her on the quiet, dimly lit Buck's Row, Jack likely made straight for Whitechapel Road, only a block or two away. At that hour, contrary to what one might imagine, the streets were already stirring. Coroner Edwin Baxter later noted in Nichols' inquest that the killer could easily vanish from Buck's Row in the twilight into Whitechapel Road and be lost sight of in the morning's market traffic. Indeed, by 3:45 or 4 a.m., Whitechapel Road was far from deserted. Lumbering hay wagons rolled in for the busy Haymarket, produce carts rattled toward Spitalfields, and hundreds of workmen trudged toward their early shifts in the waking city. Into this early morning bustle, the killer could have slipped unnoticed, blending into a tide of labourers and hawkers. But a key detail often overlooked is the man who discovered the body, Charles Cross. His name appears throughout early police reports, but his true identity was Charles Allen Lechmere, a carman who lived nearby and worked for Pickford's, a major transport company. Many modern researchers believe Lechmere may not have been a mere passerby, but Jack the Ripper himself. According to this theory, Lechmere's encounter with the body was no coincidence. Around 3:40 a.m., he claimed to have found Polly lying in the street and soon waved down another carman, Robert Paul. Together they briefly examined the body before summoning a constable. But what if Lechmere wasn't finding Nichols? What if he was caught in the act? The timing raises questions. Lechmere's route to work took him directly through Buck's Row. If he'd left home when he said he did, he should have passed the spot earlier. Some researchers argue he was actually the killer, interrupted mid-scene by Paul's approach. Calmly, Lechmere may have composed himself, adopting the role of a concerned witness. When Constable Misen arrived minutes later, Lechmere, still using the name Cross, his stepfather's surname, spoke to the officer and then walked off to work. Did Jack the Ripper quite literally talk his way past the police? Whether the killer was Lechmere or someone else, the escape route remains eerily plausible. After the murder, the man likely wiped his knife, adjusted his clothing, and walked eastward toward the market district. No scream was heard. Nichols's windpipe had been cut, ensuring silence. Within moments, the killer was among the steady stream of early risers on Whitechapel Road. And if that man was Lechmere, the illusion was perfect. His job as a carman meant his hands and clothes might bear traces of dirt, or even blood, without raising suspicion. Victorian Whitechapel was full of slaughterhouses, and butchers often walked home at dawn in blood-stained aprons. As Coroner Baxter noted, a man with blood on him would not have stood out in such surroundings. By the time Cross, Lechmere, and Paul alerted a constable, the killer, whether Lechmere himself or another, was already gone. When police first arrived, they found no witnesses, no sound of fleeing footsteps, and no obvious suspect. In truth, the murderer may have still been within sight, walking calmly into the waking streets of Whitechapel, disappearing in plain sight, and perhaps even speaking to the very officers who would spend the rest of their lives hunting him. Chapter 3. Escape 3. Hanbury Street, 8th of September 1888. A narrow window to get away. Dawn was breaking on September 8th, 1888, when Jack the Ripper struck his next victim in a cramped Spitalfields backyard. Annie Chapman was found around 6 a.m. in a fenced yard behind 29 Hanbury Street. Her murder was exceptionally gruesome. Throat cut, abdomen laid open, and organs removed. indicating the killer spent several minutes mutilating the body. How could he possibly escape unseen in a residential dwelling at daybreak? The timeline of that morning provides clues, as do the layout of the property and the apathy of a city growing used to violence. About half an hour before Annie's body was discovered, a witness had actually seen her alive with a man. Around 5:30 a.m., Mrs. Elizabeth Long passed by 29 Hanbury Street and noticed Annie talking to a dark-haired man in a deerstalker hat near the back steps of the house. The man was heard quietly asking, "Will you?" and Annie replying yes, likely as they negotiated her fee. They then disappeared through the door into the yard. Within the next 20 minutes, in that enclosed courtyard mere feet from sleeping residents, Jack the Ripper murdered and mutilated Chapman. A neighbour, Albert Kadosh, was in the adjoining yard around 5:30 to 5:45. He later testified to hearing voices and a thud against a fence, but he did not investigate and assumed it unremarkable. By not raising an alarm, this neighbour inadvertently allowed the killer precious minutes to finish his grim work. Jack the Ripper's escape route from Hanbury Street was straightforward. He left the same way he entered. The house at 29 Hanbury had a passage from the street to the backyard. After cutting Chapman's throat and hastily taking organs as trophies, the killer likely walked out through the front door onto Hanbury Street, literally passing through the house of his victim. Incredibly, this bold exit went unnoticed. John Davis, a resident, came out into the yard at 6 a.m. and discovered Annie's corpse, raising the alarm. But by that time, Jack was gone into the waking city. Why did no one see a bloodied man on Hanbury Street at sunrise? First, it was barely light, just past dawn, when only a few people were about. Those who were up may have been tradesmen setting up stalls or residents groggy from sleep. Secondly, the killer might not have been as conspicuously bloodied as imagined. The wounds to Chapman were severe, but if the Ripper wore a long coat or protective apron, as some suspect, he could conceal most stains. In fact, one contemporary newspaper marvelled that nobody heard or saw anything of the murderer. He struck again, and nobody had seen or heard a thing. It suggests that his departure caused no commotion. Likely he slipped away quickly in the immediate minutes after 5:50 a.m., when all nearby were still oblivious. It was a narrow window of escape. Had John Davis ventured into the yard a few minutes earlier, or had neighbour Kadosh peeked over the fence when he heard voices, the killer might have been caught literally red-handed. Instead, Jack the Ripper stepped out onto the early morning street, perhaps carrying Annie's missing organs wrapped in a cloth. Within minutes, he was absorbed in the labyrinth of East End streets. The densely populated neighbourhood that provided so many prying eyes also furnished countless nooks to duck into and routes to flee. Jack likely knew these back streets well. With Hanbury Street behind him and no hue and cry raised until well after he'd vanished, the Ripper once again evaded capture by seconds and inches, leaving only a mutilated corpse as evidence he was ever there. Chapter 4. Escape 4. Berner Street, 30th of September 1888. An interrupted killing. The night of September 30th, 1888 brought a grim twist. 2 murders in one night, the first of which suggested the killer was interrupted mid-attack. At about 1 a.m., the body of Elizabeth Stride was found in Dutfield's yard, off Berner Street, now Henrique Street. Unlike the other victims, Stride had only her throat cut and no further mutilation. Many believe Jack the Ripper was frightened off before he could complete his usual atrocities. If so, the moments surrounding Stride's murder provide a vivid picture of a near capture and how the killer made his escape under pressure. Multiple witnesses saw Stride with a man in the hour before her death. The most critical witness was Israel Schwartz, who at around 12:45 a.m. turned onto Berner Street and saw a man assaulting a woman, presumably Stride, near Dutfield's yard. Schwartz observed a man throw the woman to the ground. She screamed 3 times, but not very loudly. Not realizing he might be witnessing the Ripper at work, Schwartz crossed the street to avoid a domestic quarrel. At that moment, the attacker apparently noticed Schwartz. A second man appeared lighting a pipe, and the attacker shouted the word Lipski, an anti-Jewish slur, possibly to the second man, or to scare Schwartz. Schwartz, frightened that he was being followed, fled the scene on a run. Importantly, this incident likely scared Jack the Ripper as well. He had been seen, if only briefly. The evidence strongly suggests that Stride's killer cut her throat hastily after Schwartz fled, then abandoned the scene immediately before he could mutilate the body. Moments later, at approximately 1 a.m., Louis Dimeschutz turned his pony cart into Dutfield's yard and nearly collided with Stride's prone body. Dimeschutz rushed inside the adjacent club for help, thinking perhaps the woman was simply drunk or fainted. In those scant minutes, if the Ripper was still nearby, he would have slipped out. Notably, Dutfield's yard had only one entrance, the very gateway on Berner Street, where Dimeschutz had arrived. Thus, Jack likely brushed right past the arriving cart in the darkness or darted into the shadows along the street. By the time Dimeschutz and others returned to examine the body, the killer was gone. Police arrived swiftly and swarmed the area, but no suspect was found. Where did Jack go in such a hurry? Many theorists believe that, frustrated and still craving blood, he went hunting for another victim immediately, leading to the second murder of that night. Catherine Eddowes, 45 minutes later. If so, Jack the Ripper's escape from Berner Street likely involved him heading west toward the city, moving quickly but calmly through side streets. Berner Street connected northward to Commercial Road and southward toward the Thames. It's plausible he slipped north or west through the warren of alleys. The fact that no one on Berner Street reported seeing a man running or covered in blood suggests the Ripper remained eerily composed. Perhaps he even mingled briefly with onlookers gathering at the yard, feigning curiosity before quietly disappearing. A bold but not impossible tactic. Critically, Stride's murder shows Jack the Ripper at his most vulnerable. He was nearly caught in the act. A shout from Schwartz, a quicker realization by Dimeschutz, or a faster police response could have trapped the killer in that yard. But luck, or cunning, was on his side. In the chaos of people discovering Stride's body, the Ripper exploited confusion and darkness to slip down the street unnoticed. Multiple witness descriptions later gave contradictory images of Stride's companion. Some thought he was fair-haired, others dark, some well-dressed, others shabby. These inconsistencies suggest that if anyone did see the Ripper leaving, they didn't realize it. Within minutes, Jack was on the move again, heading toward his next deadly rendezvous, while the police grappled with the scene he left behind. He had escaped by the skin of his teeth. Chapter 5. Escape 5. Mitre Square, 30th of September 1888. Flight through the night. Less than an hour after Elizabeth Stride's interrupted murder, Jack the Ripper struck again, this time in the heart of the City of London, and made what might be his most astonishing escape. Catherine Eddowes was found brutally slain in Mitre Square at 1:44 a.m. by Constable Edward Watkins. The killing and mutilation of Eddowes were completed in mere minutes under the noses of an active police patrol. The killer then vanished into the night, eluding a dragnet of both Metropolitan and City police. Reconstructing Eddowes' murder and escape reveals a remarkable feat of timing and local knowledge on Jack's part. Eddowes had been released from police custody for drunkenness at 1 a.m. and was last seen alive around 1:35 a.m. talking to a man near Mitre Square. By 1:44, PC Watkins discovered her horribly mutilated body in the dark southwest corner of Mitre Square. In that narrow window, roughly 1:35 to 1:40 a.m., Jack the Ripper not only killed Eddowes, but performed extensive mutilations, removing her kidney and uterus and disfiguring her face. The audacity of this act is underscored by who was nearby. Just across the square, an on-duty night watchman was stationed in a warehouse. Around the perimeter, several policemen and even plain-clothed detectives were patrolling the surrounding streets. In fact, at the very moment Eddowes and her killer entered Mitre Square, 3 city detectives were coordinating patrols on the eastern fringe of the city. Yet, the Ripper managed to slip in, do his terrible work, and slip out without a sound. How did he do it? Silence and shadows. The corner of Mitre Square where Eddowes was found was especially dark. The night watchman, George Morris, later said he was baffled that such a brutal crime occurred without him hearing a sound. He swore he could even hear the constable's regular footsteps on his beat, yet heard no cry from Eddowes. The killer likely struck from behind, hand over Eddowes' mouth, killing her swiftly so she could not scream. Medical opinion at the inquest held that once her throat was cut, death was instantaneous and she could not have cried out. Jack then worked fast but efficiently. A police surgeon estimated the mutilations could be done in as little as 5 minutes. For his escape, Jack the Ripper had a few options. Detectives later surmised he probably exited via St. James's Place, a narrow passage adjoining Mitre Square. That passage led out toward Aldgate. Conveniently, there was a Metropolitan fire station right there. But the fireman on duty saw nothing, despite presumably being awake. Constable Richard Pierce actually lived at 3 Mitre Square, overlooking the scene. He reported neither sight nor sound of the killer departing. This suggests the Ripper left Mitre Square immediately after the murder, in darkness, and likely knew the exact route to avoid detection. Within minutes of Watkins raising the alarm at 1:45 a.m., police swarmed into the area from all directions. Inspector Daniel Halls of the City Police was on the scene by 2 a.m. and organized a sweeping search of the neighborhood. Dozens of constables and detectives fanned out, questioning men and checking alleyways. Yet the killer was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had evaporated into London's fog. One clue to his path did emerge. At 2:55 a.m., a city constable in Whitechapel, back in Metropolitan Police territory, found a piece of Catherine Eddowes' bloodied apron lying in a passageway in Galston Street, about half a mile from Mitre Square. Scrawled above it on a wall was the infamous Galston Street graffiti, which read, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Whether or not the Ripper chalked that cryptic message, the apron piece was undeniably his, dropped as he fled. This suggests that after killing Eddowes, Jack hurried eastward into Whitechapel, returning to his home turf across the border of police jurisdictions. Detective Halls actually passed down Galston Street around 2:20 a.m. on his hunt and noticed nothing unusual. But by roughly 2:55 a.m., the apron was there, meaning the Ripper likely traversed that route shortly after Halls, just missing the detective. Major Henry Smith, acting commissioner of city police, later bragged, perhaps hyperbolically, that he was only 5 minutes behind the Ripper that night. It appears the killer stayed just ahead of the pursuit. In the end, Jack the Ripper escaped Mitre Square by minutes. He took advantage of the jurisdictional divide. Once he crossed into Whitechapel, Metropolitan Police territory, the coordination between forces was poor. The dense network of alleys allowed him to zigzag homeward. It's even theorized he paused in a dark doorway to wipe his blade or hands, possibly at a public water pump or sink in Dorset Street, where a witness later claimed to see bloody water, though this account is unconfirmed. All we know for sure is that by the time the night's frenzy subsided, Jack was gone. The city police, despite nearly cornering him, were left empty-handed, their quarry having simply melted away into the night. The Mitre Square escape showcases the Ripper's cunning. He struck at the darkest spot, timed his retreat between patrols, and used the city's geography to outwit a mobilized police force. 5 murders and 1 possible earlier attack, and in each case, Jack the Ripper got away. The densely packed slums of Whitechapel provided him with an ideal playground of darkness, chaos, and escape routes. Overcrowded streets and maze-like back alleys were his allies, whether blending into a pre-dawn crowd of workers, slipping down a hidden passage moments ahead of police, or simply walking out the front door and locking it behind him. The Ripper showed a chilling ability to remain unseen. It was as if he were a phantom, but of course he was real, flesh and blood, taking calculated steps to avoid capture. Poor lighting, ineffective policing, and the community's numbness to violence all helped him. He was careful and quick, but he was also lucky. Time and again, someone almost caught a glimpse or almost raised the alarm, but not quite. Closure. In the end, Jack the Ripper was never identified or arrested. His true identity evaporated into the mists of history, even as his legend grew. We have followed his likely escape routes through 6 deadly scenarios, seeing how close he came to being caught. Mere footsteps ahead of a police officer, a door away from a waking neighbor, a minute before an alarm. Yet each time, he found a way to slip into the night, outwitting the Victorian world that pursued him. This has been a calm, investigative journey through those grim nights of 1888. A look at how one man's intimate knowledge of Whitechapel's streets, combined with audacity and luck, allowed him to commit brutal murders and then vanish without a trace. The tale of Jack the Ripper endures not just because of what he did, but because he was never caught. In showing how he likely escaped, we illuminate one part of that dark mystery. The manhunt failed, and in those silent moments after each murder, as Jack the Ripper melted away into London's labyrinth, a legend was born. Do you want to bring bad things with you wherever you go? Our episodes are now available as a podcast. Look us up on your favorite podcast app and listen to the most truth-seeking true crime podcast out there.